The boardroom was silent as the CEO stepped in. His hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. Years of pride were falling apart in one single meeting. No one looked at him, not with respect, not even with sympathy. The graphs on the screen showed one thing: failure. People whispered behind closed doors, waiting for him to fall. For the first time, he didn't have a plan. He looked at his team, hoping someone would speak, would offer a lifeline. But all he saw were blank faces and folded arms. Then, the door opened, not loudly, but enough to break the silence. A janitor walked in, mop in hand, unaware of the tension inside. The CEO dropped his papers, and they scattered across the floor. Not a single executive moved. But the janitor paused, bent down, and picked up each sheet, one by one. Their eyes met. For the first time, the CEO saw something human. "Thank you," he whispered, more to himself than the janitor. The janitor nodded silently and left the room. But something in that moment changed everything. The CEO stood straighter, like he'd just been reminded of something important. He ended the meeting early and walked out. He followed the janitor down the hallway, ignoring confused stares. Outside the cleaning closet, he waited. The janitor looked surprised when he turned around. "Do I know you?" the CEO asked, unsure why he was even speaking. The janitor smiled, gently. "You used to." The CEO blinked, confused. He couldn't remember. "Come to my office," he said. "I want to talk." Back in the office, the CEO couldn't shake the feeling that he knew the man, but all he could think about was how everyone else had let him fall. Everyone except the janitor. He sat behind his desk, staring at the company's future blank and uncertain. Minutes passed before there was a knock at the door. It was the janitor, holding a small file in his hand. "I thought you might want to see this," he said. The CEO took it and opened the file. Inside were notes, graphs, strategies, than anything he'd seen in years. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I wrote it," the janitor replied calmly. The CEO looked up, shocked. "Why are you working as a janitor then?" "Because no one listens to someone without a title," he said. The CEO didn't speak. He just kept reading. Each page felt like light in a dark tunnel. He finally looked up. "Why now? Why help me?" "Because you looked like a man who was finally ready to listen." The CEO nodded slowly. Outside, the world still expected him to fail. But maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to do it alone. The CEO couldn't sleep that night. His mind kept going back to the janitor's words. Why would someone with such knowledge work in silence? He sat by the window, staring at the city lights, wondering where he went wrong. At sunrise, he walked into the office early, something he hadn't done in years. He opened the janitor's file again and started reading from the first page. There was logic, clarity, and even heart in those pages. He called his assistant and asked her to bring the janitor immediately. When the janitor arrived, he looked calm, as if he expected this. "I need you to explain this to me, like I'm a student," the CEO said. The janitor smiled and sat down across from him. He began to explain the plan using simple words. "No ego, no schwa," for hours. The CEO listened, asked questions, and took notes. It felt like he was learning business for the first time again. In between, he asked, "What's your name?" "Thomas," the janitor replied. Thomas had once studied economics and marketing. He had degrees, even awards. But something had happened years ago that made him disappear from the world of suits. The CEO didn't push. He just listened. At the end of the meeting, he said, "I want you in the next board meeting." Thomas shook his head. "I don't belong there." "You do now," the CEO said firmly. News spread quickly in the building. Everyone was confused. Some were amused that a janitor was being invited to the boardroom, but the CEO didn't care anymore. He needed results, not titles. When the meeting began, Thomas walked in wearing his janitor uniform. People laughed quietly, hiding their smiles behind hands. The CEO stood up and introduced him without any jokes. "This man may be the reason we survive," he said. Thomas walked to the screen and began explaining the company's weaknesses. He didn't blame anyone, he just showed the truth. And, slowly, people stopped laughing. The graphs made sense. The words hit deep. One investor leaned forward, whispering, "Who is this guy?" Another nodded slowly, taking notes. Thomas spoke like someone who had nothing to prove but everything to give. The CEO watched silently, almost in awe. For the first time in months, the room was united. After the meeting, one of the senior directors approached the CEO. "Where did you find him?" he asked. The CEO looked out the window. "I didn't. He found me." That night, the CEO made a decision. He offered Thomas a role, something temporary, just a title change. But Thomas refused politely. "I want to stay invisible, at least for now," he said. "Then help me from the shadows," the CEO replied. They shook hands, silently agreeing to begin again. But not everyone was happy with the change. In the far corner of the building, a group of executives met in secret. They didn't like how fast Thomas was gaining attention. "We need to know who he really is," one said, "and why he's here now," another added. They began to dig into his past, searching through old records and forgotten files. Late that night, they found something, a news article with his photo, and a headline that could change everything. The CEO stared at the headline, stunned. It showed a younger Thomas in a sharp suit, shaking hands with a global CEO. The article spoke of a rising star in the business world, Thomas Gray, the mind behind 3 successful startups. Why didn't he ever mention this? The CEO whispered. The executives who found the article smirked, ready to use it against him. They walked into the CEO's office and placed the article on his desk. Your janitor has secrets, one of them said. The CEO picked up the article but said nothing. Later that night, he invited Thomas into his office again. Thomas saw the paper and sighed. So now you know, he said quietly. The CEO asked no questions, just waited. Thomas began to tell his story. Years ago, he had everything: media attention, influence, but one decision, one wrong partnership, and it all crumbled. He was framed for fraud by people he trusted. Though proven innocent later, his reputation never recovered. No one would hire me, he said, so I stopped trying. Why janitorial work? The CEO asked. Because it's honest, Thomas replied, and it lets me watch people without being seen. The CEO was silent for a long time. He realized Thomas had been observing everything: how teams behaved, how people failed. Thomas never stopped learning, he just stopped talking. The next morning rumors spread about Thomas's past. Some mocked him, others feared his rise. But Thomas ignored it all and kept working. The CEO called a team meeting and spoke openly. Yes, Thomas has a past. So do I, so do all of you. He paused and looked around the room. But right now, he's the one helping us move forward. There was silence. Then slow nods from a few team members. Still, some weren't convinced. Behind closed doors, jealousy turned into plotting. They began leaking parts of Thomas's past to the media. Soon, articles surfaced with half-truths and twisted facts. The company's reputation took a hit. The CEO faced pressure to let Thomas go. He refused. Instead, he walked into a press conference with Thomas beside him. You want to know who he is? The CEO said to reporters. He's the man who's fixing what the rest of us broke. Reporters shouted questions about Thomas's past. Thomas stepped up to the mic. I'm not here to erase what happened. I'm here because I still believe in second chances. The room went silent. One young journalist stood up and clapped. Others followed. The tide was turning, but not everyone clapping was sincere. In the back, a man watched closely. A face. From Thomas's past, he made a quiet call. He's back. Handle it. Trouble was coming, and neither Thomas nor the CEO saw it yet. Thomas sat quietly in his small corner office, a room that used to be a supply closet. It had no windows, only a desk, a fan, and a chair that creaked every time he moved. Yet he was at peace, but peace doesn't last forever. That evening, as he closed his laptop and packed his worn-out bag, he noticed something strange. A piece of paper had been slid under his door. It was folded neatly, but the words inside shook him. Leave now, or regret later. Thomas froze. His heart thumped loud in his ears. His fingers gripped the note tighter, crushing it slightly. He looked around, but the hallway was empty. He didn't report it. He didn't tell the CEO. He just put the paper in his pocket and walked out calmly, as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed. The next morning, he arrived earlier than usual. The security guard greeted him, but Thomas barely responded. He walked straight to the small cabinet, where he kept files, ideas he had written, plans he was helping with, and locked it with a new code. Meanwhile, the CEO noticed his silence. Thomas, he said gently, you okay? Thomas nodded. Just didn't sleep much. But the truth was deeper. That day, things took a darker turn. One of the junior staff members noticed that Thomas's cabinet was open and his papers were missing. Security checked the footage. A figure in black had broken in during the night, masked, gloves on. Nothing stolen from the company's vaults, just Thomas's files. Someone doesn't want you here, the CEO said with a clenched jaw. Thomas stayed calm. Then I must be doing something right. The CEO moved Thomas to a more secure office. He also increased security in the entire building, but whoever was behind the threats was smart, invisible, still. Thomas refused to back down. Instead of hiding, he worked harder. He trained young analysts, fixed outdated systems, helped design better customer models. Slowly, employees who once ignored him began to nod when he passed. Some even smiled. But then, something no one expected happened. A product and app idea Thomas had quietly helped shape. It took off faster than anyone imagined. Within a week, media outlets were calling it a silent revolution in the market. Investors returned. Clients signed deals. And still, Thomas refused interviews. This isn't my spotlight, he told the CEO. It's yours. But the CEO knew without Thomas, it wouldn't have happened. One night, after everyone had left, Thomas walked alone to the parking lot. The wind was cold. His steps echoed in the silence. Then a voice came from the shadows. Did you really think you could rise again? Thomas turned slowly. A man stepped forward. It was Marcus, Thomas's former business partner, the same man who had betrayed him years ago and destroyed his reputation. Marcus, Thomas said quietly. Marcus smiled, cold, smug. You're still cleaning up after CEOs. Huh? What do you want? I want you gone. Again? Marcus handed him a brown envelope. Inside copies of old accusations, twisted contracts, forged papers, threats that could damage not just Thomas's new work, but the CEO's reputation too. "I'll make a call," Marcus said. "One story in the press and your little comeback ends. Walk away now, and I won't light the match." Thomas held the papers. He didn't reply. He just looked Marcus in the eye and said, "You already tried to ruin me once. I'm still standing." Then he walked away. That night Thomas didn't sleep. Sat in his apartment, going through every page. Marcus had done his homework. He was serious. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about power. The next morning, Thomas walked into the CEO's office and placed the file on the table. "I need to show you something." The CEO flipped through the documents, his face growing darker. "Who gave you this?" "Marcus. That snake, he's behind the break-in, isn't he?" Thomas nodded. "He wants me to disappear." Again. The CEO stood up. "We don't run, we fight." They called in legal advisors, trusted, silent, and aggressive. Meanwhile, Thomas went back to work like nothing happened. But now, he wasn't just building ideas. He was preparing for war. He reorganized the company's data defenses. He secured private emails. He trained the staff not just on performance but on loyalty and resilience, and they followed. For the first time, Thomas wasn't just a helper. In the shadows, he was their quiet commander. No title, no office plaques, but his presence was powerful. One day, a young intern named Jaya came to him with tears in her eyes. "I messed up a report," she said, and the manager yelled in front of everyone. Thomas sat her down. "Let me show you something," he said. He pulled out a piece of paper from his desk. It had red ink all over IT mistakes from a decade ago. His own mistakes. Everyone falls. Real strength is standing again. Jaya nodded, wiping her eyes. That moment spread across the office, not as gossip but as inspiration. The janitor who became a mentor. Still, Marcus wasn't done. A reporter called the CEO, asking about an unnamed man from the past working inside the company. "We're aware of the story," the CEO replied calmly, "and we trust our team." The reporter didn't publish anything. Thomas sat with the CEO that evening. "Why defend me?" The CEO looked at him. "Because when no one stepped forward, you did." There was silence. Then the CEO added, "You may not want a title, Thomas, but you've already become the heart of this place." Thomas didn't reply, but something in him healed. Weeks passed. The company was now more alive than ever. Marcus sent one final letter, one last attempt to scare them. It arrived in a black envelope. Inside was a single sentence. "Next time, I won't knock." Thomas placed it in a drawer. He didn't shred it. He didn't report it. He just locked it away, because he knew this wasn't the end, but he was ready now. Ending hook suspenseful. That night, the building's alarm went off. A security guard saw a shadow in the basement, someone trying to cut the power. But when they reached the spot, the person had vanished. Only one thing was left behind, a boot print and a piece of paper taped to the wall. It read, "You should have walked away, Thomas." Thomas stared at the message on the screen when security sent it. To him, he didn't flinch. He just whispered, "Let him come," and walked back to work focused and unshaken. Thomas came to work earlier than usual. Something in the air felt off. People weren't smiling today. Whispers filled the hallways. And when Thomas walked by, even the ones who once clapped for him now looked away. The moment he reached a small desk in the basement, the phone rang. "Come upstairs," the CEO said. His voice was tight, cold. "We have a situation." When Thomas entered the boardroom, everyone went silent. The board members looked uncomfortable. A projector was already on, paused on a grainy security video. "This was sent to us this morning," said a woman from the board. "It shows you accessing a private server at 1:14 a.m. and deleting something." Thomas stepped closer to the screen. It was indeed him, or someone wearing his uniform, his face doing something he never did. He didn't speak. He didn't panic. "That's not me," he said quietly. The room remained quiet. "Someone's framing you," the CEO finally muttered. But not everyone agreed. A few board members looked skeptical. Until yesterday, Thomas was a hero. Today, he was suddenly the villain. The emotional hook had changed. He was alone again. By noon, his access to sensitive company folders was cut off. His badge stopped working on certain floors. An email circulated until further notice. "Thomas is not authorized to handle confidential data." It hit him like a punch. After everything he had done, still, Thomas didn't fight it. Instead, he returned to the dusty storage room where he used to sweep floors. The place hadn't changed much. Same old boxes, same broken filing cabinet, and the same small window that let in barely any light. But there, behind the oldest box, something caught his eye. A silver hard drive, untouched, forgotten. He remembered the SIT was a backup drive. He once helped IT store years ago. After a company-wide server crash, he grabbed it, cleaned off the dust, and plugged it into his own laptop. The screen lit up. There it was. The missing presentation. Every slide, every detail. The real strategy the CEO was supposed to present today. Thomas's hands shook as he printed out the entire presentation. Page after page. He didn't waste a second. He grabbed the pages, rushed upstairs, and ran toward the boardroom just as the CEO stood at the head of the table, empty-handed, trying to explain to the investors why the meeting was delayed. The moment Thomas entered, the room fell silent. He didn't say a word, just walked in and gently placed the pages on the boardroom table. One by one, slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. The story unfolded: profits, vision, future, purpose. The investors watched in awe when the final page was placed. The room exploded into applause. The CEO turned slowly to the board and said, "You still think he's the problem?" That night, the IT department traced the security footage's origin. It had been edited and uploaded from an external IP address, a private hotel suite, under Marcus's name. It was a trap. The next turning point came fast. The board sent a formal apology email to the entire company. It read, "Thomas's reputation remains intact. We owe him more than we can say." But Thomas didn't care about apologies. His heart was tired, wounded. He had worked for people, fought for their trust, and still, the moment a shadow appeared, they doubted him. He didn't want power. He wanted peace. The CEO called him into his office and slid a letter across the desk. "You've earned this," he said. It was a job offer, Chief Strategy Officer. Thomas stared at it for a long moment, and then pushed it back. "I appreciate it," he said softly, "but I don't want a title. I want to be useful." The CEO frowned. "People respect titles." Thomas looked out the window. "Then they're not listening. I want them to listen to the truth." But the attacks weren't over. A few days later, during a casual after-hours cleaning, the security team caught a nervous intern hiding something under the CEO's desk. A small device, a tracker. When questioned, the intern broke down. "Marcus paid me," he confessed. He had been planted by Marcus's company from the start. Now, it wasn't just digital warfare. It was personal. The company increased security. A private investigator was hired, and Thomas Key returned to the shadows, helping, guiding, rebuilding. But the shadows weren't safe anymore. One evening, as Thomas crossed the road to his apartment, a black car sped up from the corner. Headlights off, no horn, no warning. Thomas jumped back just in time. The car vanished, but the message was clear. They wanted to scare him, maybe worse. He sat in the hospital, bruised, shaken, but alive. The CEO arrived minutes later, breathless. "I won't let this go." Thomas nodded slowly. "Neither will I, but not with revenge." "Then with what?" the CEO asked. "With truth." That night in his tiny apartment, Thomas took out an old notebook. He opened the first page and began writing everything, what he saw, what he suspected, what he believed. He called it the Janitor's Notebook. It wasn't just notes. It was his voice, his warning, his message, and it was only the beginning. The news traveled fast. Someone tried to hit Thomas with a car, and even though there were no cameras, no license plate, and no witnesses, people inside the company started whispering. This wasn't just office politics anymore. This was war. Thomas returned to work after just one day in the hospital. His arm was bandaged, ribs sore, and his steps slower, but his eyes were sharper than ever. When the receptionist saw him walk in, she stood up shocked. "You should rest," she whispered. Thomas gave a faint smile. "The fight doesn't stop because I'm tired." He walked straight past the elevator and went back to the basement, back to his corner, back to the files, back to the shadows. But this time, he wasn't alone. When he sat down, a young woman appeared at the door, nervous, holding a USB stick in her hand. "I heard what happened to you," she said. "I think I can help." Thomas looked at her, surprised. She was an assistant in the marketing department, quiet, always overlooked. She stepped closer. 3 weeks ago, Marcus called me, offered me money to leak files. I didn't do it, but I recorded the call. Thomas took the USB. And right then, something changed. He realized there were more people like him. Good people watching, waiting, afraid. But now, they were waking up. Thomas opened the file that night, and the voice was clear. Marcus laughing, threatening, offering cash for betrayal. It wasn't just corruption. It was proof. But Thomas didn't rush. He made a copy of the file, encrypted it, and placed it in a secure digital locker, one that would send the evidence to journalists if anything happened to him. Then, he printed one photo from the file. Marcus, sitting in a hotel bar, talking to someone in a government suit. That one image said it all. This went higher than anyone thought. The next morning, Thomas handed the photo to the CEO. The CEO stared at it for a long time. "I knew Marcus was dangerous," he whispered. "But this is different." He looked up. "We need to go public." Thomas shook his head. "Not yet. If we go too early, they'll spin it. We need to show the truth in a way no one can deny." The CEO looked confused. "How?" Thomas leaned in, his voice low. "Let me speak." The company was planning its annual all-staff town hall. Over 1,200 employees, live-streamed to every regional office. Usually, only the CEO and board spoke. But this time, Thomas made a special request. "Give me 5 minutes on stage," he said. At first, everyone laughed. A janitor, speaking on the main stage. But the CEO silenced the room. "He's the only reason we're still standing," they agreed. But no one knew what Thomas would say. The day arrived. The stage was lit, cameras were on, and Thomas walked up not in a suit, not with slides, just in his uniform, bandage still on his arm. The audience went quiet. He looked out across the room and said, "I was hired to clean, not speak, not lead, not fight." He paused, but when no one else stood up for the truth, I couldn't stay silent. A murmur moved through the crowd. I was framed, lied about, targeted, but not just me. You too, all of you. He took a breath. You were told to stay in line, told that your ideas weren't big enough, that your titles weren't high enough. But the truth needs no title. The room shifted, people leaned forward. Thomas raised a hand and said, "There's a war happening, not just in this company. In every place where truth makes people uncomfortable. In every room where silence is safer than standing up." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a notebook. "This is my story, my truth. I've written every name, every lie, every truth I've seen." He opened the first page. "This isn't about revenge. It's about reminding people who they are." He looked at the CEO, then at the camera. "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here so no one else feels like they're alone." Silence, then one clap, then another. Then the whole room stood. The janitor had become the voice of the people. The video went viral. In 48 hours, it was seen by 10 million people. News anchors quoted him. Truth needs no title. People in other companies began speaking up. Emails flooded in from around the world. "Thank you, Thomas. You gave me courage. I almost quit until I heard you." But not everyone was happy. That same night, Thomas received a letter, slid under his apartment door. No return address, just 6 words. "Speak again, and you disappear." He read it, folded it, and placed it in his notebook. He didn't stop. Instead, he launched something new, a public blog. The Janitor's Notebook, real stories from inside the system. He began posting real, verified stories from workers everywhere. About corruption, abuse, power games. He verified every one of them before posting. And each one ended with the same message. Truth needs no title. Marcus tried everything. Legal threats, cyber attacks, fake videos. None of it worked. Thomas had the truth, and now the people had him. But something darker was brewing. Thomas's apartment was broken. Into one night, nothing was stolen but everything. With search. Files moved, drawers opened, even his toothbrush had been snapped in half. It was a message. "We were here. We're watching." Thomas moved into a company-owned guest house the next day, guarded and under watch. The CEO gave the order. "No more games. We end this." And that's when the biggest surprise came. A woman appeared at the company's front desk. Early 40s, black coat, gray eyes, quiet voice. She asked for Thomas. When she met him, she whispered, "I used to work for Marcus. Government. Contracts. I know everything." Thomas stared at her. "Why are you here?" She looked down. "I heard your speech. I want to help." She handed him a black flash drive and said just 5 words. "This ends with Washington, D.C." The security cameras blinked red that night. Thomas stayed late, like always. He walked down the quiet halls with a mop in one hand, but his eyes were scanning everything. Ever since the CEO made him a silent advisor, Thomas knew he had enemies. Not outside but inside the company. One of the junior employees, a shy IT guy named Arjun, approached him. "Mr. Thomas," he whispered, looking over his shoulder. "Someone just tried to access the CEO's personal files." Thomas turned to face him. "Did they get in?" "No," Arjun said, shaking his head, "but they tried from the inside. Someone with high-level access." Thomas nodded. "Thank you. Keep this between us." That night, Thomas sat in the janitor's closet and opened his old laptop. It was scratched, dusty, but inside, it held powerful programs. Programs he built long ago. Ones that could track digital footprints in minutes. Within an hour, he had the name, Bradley Shaw, senior executive, charming smile, always too friendly. Thomas didn't tell the CEO, not yet. Instead, he followed Bradley, quietly, patiently. 3 days later, at an internal company pitch meeting, Bradley presented a new product idea, but Thomas had seen it before. It was a recycled pitch from a startup that failed 3 years ago, stolen, slightly changed. The CEO looked impressed, until Thomas stood up at the back of the room. "Where did you get that design, Bradley?" he asked calmly. Bradley paused, smiling. "We've been working on it in-house for months." "No, you haven't," Thomas replied. He connected his tablet to the projector. A web page appeared, a patent, dated and archived. The same design, same concept. Gasps echoed across the room. The CEO narrowed his eyes. "Bradley, is this true?" Bradley's face turned red. "This is a coincidence. Anyone could, accept you filed a fake timestamp on our servers last week," Thomas added. "Arjun found it, and I verified it." Bradley's confidence shattered. He tried to speak, but no words came. He left the room without another word. Later that day, security escorted him out. The CEO sat with Thomas alone. "You saved me again," he said. Thomas didn't smile. "This isn't about saving you. It's about protecting the company." The CEO nodded. "Then maybe it's time you stopped hiding." But Thomas shook his head. "Not yet. There's someone else." The CEO frowned. "What do you mean?" Thomas leaned forward. "Bradley was just the pawn. There's a player behind him." That night, Thomas returned home to his tiny apartment. A brown envelope waited at his doorstep. Inside, photos of his daughter, his old home, a single note: "Stop digging, or we finish what we started." Thomas froze. He hadn't told anyone he had a daughter, not even the CEO. She was the only reason he stayed low all these years. He called her immediately. "Dad," she answered sleepily. "Sweetheart," he whispered, "do not go outside unless I say. Lock the windows. Stay alert. Is everything okay?" "Yes," he lied. "I just miss you." But deep inside he knew his past wasn't buried. It was waking up that next day. The CEO called an emergency board meeting. Thomas watched from a side room via live stream. Suddenly, one of the board members stood and said, "Why is a janitor influencing our CEO's decisions?" The room fell silent. Another voice joined in. "What qualifications does he have to even be in this building beyond cleaning?" The CEO stood. "He has more integrity than half this room. He has experience none of you understand." But the board pushed harder. They demanded transparency, background checks, full disclosure. Thomas knew the storm was coming, and this time, it wasn't just about business. He sat on the rooftop that night, looking at the stars. His mind raced. He had kept his past buried to protect his daughter. Now, someone was using her to control him. He had two choices: disappear again, or fight back. He chose the second. He opened his old encrypted drive. Inside it, files, documents, names, emails, from the very people who framed him years ago. He had kept them all, and now he was ready to burn everything down if he had to. But he'd do it smart, slow, and surgical. He called the CEO. "Meet me alone," he said. "Tomorrow. Midnight, no guards, no questions." "Why?" the CEO asked. "Because the game has changed." Midnight, the city was quiet. Only the wind moved. The CEO waited on the rooftop alone, just like Thomas asked. Then he saw him. Not in janitor clothes this time. Thomas wore a black coat, eyes sharp. He didn't look like a cleaner anymore. He looked like someone who had nothing to lose. "I need you to see something," Thomas said, handing him a flash drive. "But once you open this, there's no turning back." The CEO inserted it into his tablet. Silence. Then documents. Emails, wire transfers, names. And one name made him freeze. His own CFO, Margaret Lane. "Impossible." The CEO whispered. "She's been leaking your plans for over a year," Thomas said. "To your competitors, to government contacts, even to Bradley. She's the one pulling strings." The CEO couldn't believe it. "Why?" Thomas pointed to the final file. Inside an old scandal. A government cover-up, one Thomas tried to expose 10 years ago. That's when they framed him, fired him, forced him into hiding. "I lost everything," Thomas said quietly, "but I survived and I waited." The CEO looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me. No one ever does until the truth burns them." The next morning, Margaret walked into the boardroom, smiling like usual. Then security stepped in behind her. The CEO stood. "Margaret Lane, you're suspended pending full investigation. All devices confiscated. You'll be escorted out immediately." Her smile dropped. "You can't be serious." "I have proof," the CEO said calmly. "A full file, copied, backed up, shared with federal investigators this morning." She paused, eyes wide. "You don't know who you're messing with." Thomas stepped in through the side door. "I do," he said. "I've known for 10 years. Margaret froze. "You?" she whispered. "You were supposed to be gone." Thomas smiled. "I was, until you threatened my daughter." Her face turned cold. "You've made a big mistake," she hissed. "But this time," Thomas didn't back down. "No, you did. When you thought a janitor would stay silent forever." Outside, the press waited. News had leaked a senior executive accused of corporate treason, but no one knew who exposed her. That evening, the CEO went live. He stood before cameras and said, "Sometimes heroes don't wear suits. They wear gloves and carry mops. One man saved this company, not for money, but for truth." People whispered. Some guessed out, but Thomas didn't want the spotlight. He stayed in the background, watching. Later that night, he called his daughter. "It's over," he said. "You're coming home?" she asked. He smiled. "Soon. But first, one last thing." He entered his apartment, sat down at his desk, and opened a folder titled "The Real Enemy." Inside data, photos, a bigger name. One connected to Margaret, Bradley, and even Thomas's old investigation. His hands trembled, because this name wasn't just powerful, it was protected. Someone still active in the government, someone who had tried to erase him a decade ago, and now, they were watching again. He could feel it. His laptop beeped. "Access denied. System breach." DIT was trying to erase his files. Thomas leaned back. Smiled, because he had already sent the real copies. To the one person he trusted most. Far away, in a small apartment, Arjun opened his inbox. One message. "If anything happens to me, release this to the world." Arjun read the files. His eyes widened. He realized Thomas wasn't just saving a company, he was saving everything. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He knew his past had returned. But this time, he wouldn't run. His phone buzzed. A message flashed on screen. "They're coming. Leave now." It was from someone deep inside the system. Someone who owed him a favor. Thomas didn't panic. He picked up a small box from under his bed. Inside old IDs, a backup phone, a second flash drive. He whispered to himself, "This ends tonight." Meanwhile, in the company's headquarters, the CEO sat in his office with Arjun reviewing the files Thomas had sent. "This is bigger than us," Arjun said. "These aren't just business leaks. These are national secrets." The CEO nodded. "It explains why Margaret was untouchable for so long." Arjun looked concerned. "What do we do now?" The CEO replied, "We go to the press." But Thomas had warned them, "If you move too early, they'll bury you," and that warning was about to become real. That afternoon, a fake news report aired on several national channels. Disgraced ex-employee hacks corporation, leaks false documents. The photo shown was Thomas's. The anchors called him dangerous, a traitor, a liar. It was a hit piece, well-crafted, fast-spread, and clearly funded. Even Arjun panicked. They've made him the villain. The CEO clenched his jaw. They're cleaning the mess, silencing him before people believe the truth. He picked up his phone to call Thomas. No answer. Then his office lights blinked, and the power cut out. Everything went dark. In a secure building far away, Thomas sat in a small windowless room. Only one bulb lit the table. Across from him sat a man in a dark suit. "You've caused a lot of trouble," the man said calmly. Thomas didn't flinch. "I've just started." The man smiled coldly. "You've made enemies who don't forgive. You're not a whistleblower. You're a ghost, and we know how to deal with ghosts." Thomas leaned forward. "And I know how to haunt people who hide behind fake power." The man stood, furious. "You think you've won something?" Thomas pulled out a recorder from his coat. "You just confirmed everything I needed." Meanwhile, Arjun received a message from Thomas's emergency account. Inside was a new file. It had audio recordings, covert meeting logs, and, most importantly, a list of high-profile names involved in covering up a tragedy from years ago. And one of the names was shocking. Not just a political figure, not just a billionaire, but someone inside the current government's Security Council, the man behind Thomas's downfall, the man who had ordered him erased. The CEO burst into Arjun's office. "Did you get it?" Arjun nodded. "It's all here. But we can't take it public yet," he said. "We need backup. Media will spin it. Government will deny it." The CEO thought for a second. Then he said, "There's one person who won't ignore this." The next scene opens in a dim, private room inside a news studio. A female journalist sat across from the CEO. She was known for her fearless interviews, and her own brother had once been silenced for exposing corruption. He handed her the files. "This will shake the nation," he said. She opened the folder. Her face turned pale. This could cause collapse." The CEO nodded. "It's the truth." She paused. "And what about Thomas?" He replied. "He risked everything. He's still risking it." Then the journalist leaned forward. "Then let's give the world a reason to listen." Back in the holding room, the suited man received a message. He looked up at Thomas, suddenly tense. Thomas smiled. "They're already talking, aren't they?" The man walked out, locked the door. But Thomas knew he had started the fire, and now it couldn't be stopped. Rain fell hard that night. The city looked calm, but beneath the surface something big was happening. The truth had begun to spread. Social media exploded. Hashtags were trending. News channels were asking questions. People were connecting the dots. And one name kept showing up: Thomas. The janitor. The ghost. The man who no one believed now couldn't be ignored. Inside a small motel room, Thomas watched quietly as the TV screen changed from smear campaigns to urgent debates. Reporters were now asking, why was this man silenced? Who is really running this corporation? What else are they hiding from the public? Thomas didn't smile. Not yet. He knew the game wasn't over, because truth is dangerous, and those empowered don't fall easily. Back at headquarters, chaos erupted. The boardroom was no longer quiet and polished. It was loud. Panicked, Margaret stormed in, throwing papers on the table. "Who leaked it?" she shouted. Everyone looked at her. One board member stood up. "You did this to yourself." Margaret glared. "Careful, you're not clean either." The CEO walked in, calm but firm. He placed a document on the table, effective immediately. "You are suspended." Margaret, she froze. "You don't have the authority," he interrupted. "The evidence is enough. And the world is watching." Margaret was escorted out, but she didn't go quietly. She whispered to the CEO as she passed him. "You've made a powerful enemy," he replied coldly. "So did you." Meanwhile, Arjun met with the investigative journalist again. She had done it. A full 1-hour special aired uncut. Unstoppable. Thomas's recordings, Margaret's schemes, and the government link. Everything. The truth could no longer be hidden. And in homes across the country, people sat silently as they watched. They saw how a janitor once ignored and insulted had stood up against giants. How he had lost his name, his career, and nearly his life, but never his purpose. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the company gates. Security guards stood straight, shocked to see him. He walked past them. No badge, no ID. But no one stopped him, because now, they knew who he was. He entered the same lobby, where he used to mop the floors. The same building where people once looked through him. Now, Every step he took echoed with respect. The CEO stood waiting, behind him, the entire board. He walked forward, looked Thomas in the eye, and said, "We were wrong about you." Thomas didn't respond with pride. He simply asked, "Are you ready to build something honest now?" The CEO nodded. Thomas said, "Then I'm in, but this time not as a janitor." He pulled out a folder, inside a proposal, not just to fix the company, but to use its power for real change. Jobs, scholarships, whistleblower protection, and programs for people like him, people forgotten by the system. Later that week, a press conference was held. The CEO stood in front of microphones, but it was Thomas who walked up to speak, not polished, not rehearsed, just real. He looked into the cameras and said, "I was once invisible. I cleaned offices where I wasn't allowed to speak. I was told I didn't belong in meetings, in decisions, in power. But truth doesn't need permission, and every person, no matter their title, can make a difference. You just have to dare to speak when it's hardest." 1 week after the press conference, the world had moved on, but not everyone. Thomas sat alone in his apartment staring at a photo. It was old, worn out, a picture of a woman smiling, holding a baby in her arms. His wife, his son. He whispered, softly, "I did what I promised. But why does it still feel incomplete?" The world now saw him as a hero, the man who took down corruption, the man who made the system shake up. But deep inside, Thomas was haunted, not by fear, by regret. He remembered the day he lost everything, the night they were leaving town, the phone call, the black car that followed, the explosion. His wife and son gone in seconds, and Thomas. He had survived, but only in body. His soul had been crushed that night. He thought he had buried the pain. But now, with cameras gone and battles over, the silence brought it back. Then a knock on the door. A courier package for Mr. Thomas Reed. Thomas opened the box. Carefully. Inside was a small file. No name, no return address, just a note. "You thought it was an accident. It wasn't." Thomas froze. Margaret. He pulled the files out, photos, phone records, and one blurry surveillance image. A car, a figure walking away. The same night as the explosion, and a file number circled in red, number 18,947, Project Phoenix. Thomas leaned back, heart racing. Project Phoenix. He had heard that name before, long ago, when he worked for the company in his real identity, before being erased, back when he was a rising executive, before Margaret framed him. He stood up, walked to a locked cabinet, unlocked it, inside a flash drive. His last backup. He had kept it hidden for over a decade. Plugged it in, opened the folder. There it was. A document with one title, Phoenix Eyes Only. As he read, the color drained from his face. It wasn't just corporate fraud. This was bigger. Illegal arms deals. Offshore labs, people made to disappear. And Margaret was just a piece of it. Suddenly, everything clicked. His demotion wasn't just punishment. His family's death wasn't random. It was all connected. He had uncovered too much back then, and they made sure he forgot. But now, it was back. And the real war was just beginning. He picked up the phone. Dialed. "Arjun, I need you." His friend replied, "What's wrong?" Thomas paused and said, "Everything we fought was just the surface, and I think my family was murdered to keep a secret." The storm was no longer coming. It had already arrived. Thomas stood in the underground archive, surrounded by dusty boxers, old files, and secrets that were never meant to see the light. Each folder he opened revealed more: names of politicians, hidden offshore accounts, disguised weapon shipments, vanished employees, and at the center of it all, Project Phoenix. He found a list of approved personnel with classified access. He scanned through it slowly. Then he froze. One name stared back at him: Vincent Hale, the beloved former CEO, his mentor, the man who first hired him, the man Thomas trusted the most before everything fell apart. And next to his name was the label, Architect. Thomas stumbled backward. His mind raced. Vincent. It was you all along. It all made sense. Now. Margaret was not the queen of the corruption. She was just a guard dog. The real mastermind had been smiling in interviews, funding charities, and shaking hands with presidents, all while pulling strings from the shadows. Vincent Hale had played everyone, including Thomas. Scene shift. A private island. An old man stands on the balcony, looking at the sea. Calm, quiet Vincent Hale. He's watching the sunset, sipping tea. Behind him, a large screen plays the news. Thomas Reed, the janitor who brought down $1 billion empire, is missing. Authorities fear he may be in danger. Vincent smiles. He was always a stubborn one, he whispers. But then, a voice from behind. "You're not smiling now." Vincent turns. It's Thomas standing in the shadows, alive, determined, and not alone. Behind him, Arjun, Lydia, the receptionist, and 2 former whistleblowers. Vincent chuckles. "You finally put the pieces together." "Thomas, I didn't just come for justice. I came for truth." Vincent raises his hand, pressing a hidden button on his desk. Nothing happens. Thomas smiles. "I disabled it. Your panic room won't open tonight." Vincent's face drops. They sit, for the first time in years. Student and mentor face each other. Thomas lays down files, photos, evidence. I have everything. The government. They'll see who you really are. Vincent sighs. You know exposing me won't stop this machine. I'm just one part of it. Thomas leans forward.